looking at the aspect of love that you mentioned in your book here, Unconditional Love Is, Appreciating Aspects of Life. Honesty. Now, honesty for me is a really big one, and I'd love to hear what you've got to say about this, because some time ago, in fact it's now 20 years ago, I was on the receiving end of a channeled message from a healing group, a spiritual healing group upstairs, and the first 3 words of this message were written in capital letters, and they were honesty, 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 and each one had an exclamation mark at the end of it. And I thought, what's all this about? You know, am I not being honest? Am I being dishonest? I had no idea that honesty was a major issue for me. And it's really it's something that's persisted in a way. You know, I kind of got the idea that it was all about being honest about what's going on for me, you know, who I am, or I mean, even now you can see from the way that I'm faltering about this that I'm not very clear about it. So I'm keen to know what you're going to say about it. So what I'll do first of all is to read the 3 paragraphs that you've written about honesty, and let's see what points there are that we can take up here. Honesty. To intimately know ourselves is to be truly honest with our motivation and intent towards all experiences. Such honesty is born of a love for self and a desire to live in freedom from the shadows of illusionary beliefs. We learn to discern our personal truth from that which we accepted from outer sources. To honestly, this, you're going it like this as well. This is 3 honesties all together. To honestly look at ourselves is to become vulnerable with our deepest nature and touch the greater truth we are. Personal growth and evolution are found through the activity of honest contemplation for inner understanding. The core of our being resides in this purest form of our potential. Unconditional love is honesty. Through the love of self, we learn what life is like to be truly honest and intimate with ourselves and others. So, it's a big one, I think. This one is. What do you got to say about this?
Honestly, this was obviously, you know, a big one for me, because I think when I originally started with, you know, the idea of honesty, there was 1, you know, and then the more I delved within myself and more I realized myself in relationship to the life around me, I kind of came to that 2nd level. Oh, honestly, how do I look at life? Mm-hmm. And then as, you know, I further delved in and inward and outward, the 3rd one came up, because it really does, and I'm sure there are many more layers of honesty. But let's take the 1st level of honesty in a way. And that's that, you know, we often think of honesty in terms of a kind of a moral view of life. What's our moral compass? What being honest, we tend to say, well, you know, being honest is telling the truth. You know, if we're going to be somewhere, we'll be there, and if we're not going to be there, we're just going to say, you know, we can't be there, as opposed to making up an excuse and trying to, you know, make ourselves look good, or, you know, justify other choices. That kind of moral compass, when rightly looked at, is based on a lot of, you know, ideas about ourself, life, the universe, and everything. Again, as we've said many times, based on suggestions, based on what other people do, what other people say, what other people teach us, you know, certainly at an early age. Other people's perception of honesty, you know, becomes part of our world, because that's really how we get, you know, knowledge, awareness, and experience. You know, as children, we start mimicking things around us. And, you know, honesty can be kind of a spectrum, because we can think we're being honest about something, you know, in our day-to-day, you know, everyday routine, and we might think a little white lie is, you know, maybe not, you know, totally dishonest. It's just not necessarily being totally honest. But, we become very relative with what we consider honesty. So this first level of honesty, this kind of moral compass, is quite a superficial way of, looking at life. And it kind of is based on the constructs of what we learned in childhood and how we kind of perceive our relationship to life. The second level of honesty certainly goes deeper. And when we say honestly, this is a point where we begin to ask questions, who am I really? Am I all these beliefs? Am I all these traditions? Am I all these, things that everybody has taught me? And do I really believe in these things, these ways, or am I simply validating my life, justifying my life to fit in, to conform, to be a part of, family relationships, community, work, whatever? So the second level of honesty is when we really begin to start to question, who am I really? Who am I? Who am I in relationship to what that first level of honesty is kind of like, just kind of a recognition. I'm part of a group, I'm part of a community, I'm part of a family, I'm part of, whatever. This deeper level really begins to uncover some interesting aspects of ourselves, because now we're beginning to say, well, yes, I have always thought I saw life this particular way. And notice I'm not making specific definitions or ideas or concepts, because it's really not my responsibility. Because, with so many of us on the planet, there's so many traditions, so many beliefs, so many ways of looking at this. And yet the notion of becoming truly honest with ourselves is universal. So we're looking at this particular quality, this universal quality of honesty that helps us better understand and become and have the experience of unconditional love. So, each person will have to ask themselves, okay, I thought I was this. I thought, being honest meant just doing the right thing at the right time. Well, that is certainly a component. And yet, we're going from this kind of outer look at life to an inner look. Now we need to start asking ourselves, what does my heart say? How do I really perceive life? And, one example might be is, we might have, picked up on the idea, kind of became acclimated to this notion that when we, got to a certain age, we would, begin a career of a certain type. More or less, perhaps, because of the family collective ideas, things we might have perceived we were good at, and then also outwardly looking and say, who's successful in this? And, there were attractions, and we might have, decided somewhere along the line that we're going to go, become educated and take up a particular type of career. But really because of a lot of outer circumstances. Maybe there was the perception that there was greater financial reward by going down that path. Maybe there's perception of greater prestige going down that path. Maybe that's what we felt compelled based on those around us, kind of wanted us to do this, or, the family tradition is everybody else did this. Mm-hmm. Well, what would happen if we were coming more from our heart and say, well, we really genuinely have an affinity to a very different way of approaching life? If we're not considering it based solely upon finance, prestige, or doing what we think we're supposed to be doing for everybody else, or trying to fit into a collective, society way of doing it, now all of a sudden we're in a place where there's far greater potential. In other words, we're not so locked into a particular way, and we're not doing things to conform to outer suggestions and experiences. Now we've just opened up a second layer level of potential, which doesn't that strike us sounding more unlimited? Fewer limitations, more potential, fewer limitations, more love, doing less things out of complying, we can even say shame, guilt. There's so many things that cause us to do things when we don't really question why we do things or how we do things, which really begs the second level of question of deeper honesty. Who am I really? Well, on the first pass on that second level of honesty, there's going to be a lot of overlap from that first level of honesty. In other words, we're still going to kind of judge ourselves, justify ourselves, place ourselves in circumstances, situations, hold on to beliefs, because it takes a bit of a transition, to make that leap, to begin to say, wait a minute, I think I really would like to do this, or I'd like to experience that, or I see life this way rather than that way. And, this particular stage can at times come across to others as being rather rebellious, because we're going against the status quo. We're going, for ourselves, but we're not necessarily complying to the rules, rituals, and traditions and obligations and the so-called moral compass, that we've placed ourselves in. Interestingly enough, in this particular level, kind of this mid-level of honesty, we start to realize that a lot of our moral compass was based more on outer ways of looking at life. What is truth? What is honesty? Well, truth and honesty in that kind of superficial level is, how do I fit in? We go to this next level, it would seem to a lot of people that when we start to question who we are and start to find our own truth and let that come more to the surface, that we're no longer complying, that we are not necessarily being honest with ourselves, or that we are not necessarily, that the fear is that we won't accept responsibility for our lives. And therefore the idea is, well, that level, who am I? And I can do anything, unlimited. I can go out and create havoc in the world and it's okay. This kind of honesty is heart-centered. Heart-centered doesn't work that way. Heart-centered is saying, like, you might have, a person might have a tremendous gift that they've come here to give in this particular lifetime that could affect, countless numbers of people. And yet if we never allow ourselves to explore that gift, we never really are able to fulfill that potential. So the second one is that kind of the mid place, where we begin to question and we begin to reveal. We say, okay, I kind of see that, this is my truth. Going to the third level.
Before you go on to your third level, Harold, I don't know what it is you're going to be saying, but just going back to what you were saying about how can I find out who I really am? How can I be honest about who I really am? I mean, I've always struggled with this to some degree, because I perhaps like a lot of people, even most people, I've got quite a number of different identities within me, quite a number of different personas. I can be different sorts of people in different circumstances, and sometimes there'll be a voice within my head that'll be a bit negative, and other times very positive and very uplifting, very spiritual. And I've always found it quite tricky to work out, who am I? What is my real, honest truth of who I am? Is it that I'm all of these things, or is there a kind of a core to that, which, if I could identify it and kind of bring it to the fore and perhaps live that core rather than all the rest of it, that would be being more honest, more myself.
And really what you're explaining is that transition from that first level of honesty, where we are pretty much, I could almost say, working out a habit, ritual, and quite unconscious about ourselves. We're not really aware of ourselves. We're simply acting and reacting according to a whole variety of belief systems, suggestions, notions, ideas, fitting in, not fitting in. It's really when we start doing it, and we're not necessarily even talking about the rebellious stages of teenage years, because in those cases, we're often just rebelling on those first levels. We're beginning to perhaps ask that deeper question. Who am I really? Because we aren't necessarily feeling the alignment with all these things that we've been taught. But some people never really move out of that first layer. What you're speaking of is part of the opportunity / challenge that comes up when you start to begin to question. You kind of start to say, and somewhere in one's life, they perhaps will start to say, who am I really? And do I really believe these things? And oftentimes it can come based on a certain particular experience, like the contrast between what we thought was true, what we were taught was true, is all of a sudden juxtaposed with something that seemingly contradicts that tremendously, so much so that the contrast causes us to question. And I happen to be one that really believes in questioning reality is a great place to find out more about reality. To be locked into a very specific set of rules, regulations, rituals, traditions, beliefs really limits the fullness of the experience. So honesty being a quality of love and an aspect of love, and something that we can further unfold to understand love, happens when we go from kind of this first to the second level. And absolutely, one of the things that you're suggesting is true. What happens is you start to realize, like, you didn't realize before this that you had lots of personalities. Now you're beginning to realize that you have lots of personalities. What do we do with it? In other words, and I say personalities, we have lots of projections. In this circumstance, we strive to be this way, and in that circumstance, we strive to be another way. Because in each case, we're trying to fit in, we're trying to be accepted, we're trying to validate our various views. The problem with this, having multiple beliefs, multiple views, and being outward projected versus inward, is there's an inner sense of self, an inner sense of self-awareness, self-acceptance that isn't really being addressed when we're just rather habitually going through life. So this question starts to stir the pot. This question starts to make us say, who am I really? You know, how can I amalgamate all these pieces of me? And this is something that revealing more love will do naturally, is that all of a sudden we'll start to find our own truth in relationship to all these things that we had been previously doing. We start to get more honest with ourselves, say, you know, we get invited to something, we say, you know, I don't really feel like going. I just don't know why, but I'm going to honor myself and not go. I'm not going to make an excuse. I'm not going to try to be somewhere I don't really want to be because I think I'm supposed to be there. We go to that space where we begin to no longer act out of obligation, out of tradition, and we don't shrug it off, suppress it, or try to justify it by coming up, you know, excuses, little white lies. We simply are honest. Now, this is a very different level of honesty because we're no longer complying to this outer world. We're beginning to say, wait a minute, you know, at this particular moment, I'm going to honor myself and we say not go to something. Which, interestingly enough, you know, I bring up in one of my books, an often overlooked area is that when we honor ourselves, we really do honor everybody else. Because in those moments where we say don't go to a particular event that we thought we should go, make an appearance, you know, keep friends happy with us, whatever, we actually create a space, a different environment, or a different context for other people to have experiences that wouldn't have happened had we been there. Plus, we create new contexts of experiences for ourselves because we're not there. This is that kind of that middle space of where we begin to explore these multiple, almost conflicting belief systems that you're talking about. And it can be kind of muddy, it can be kind of murky because we're still kind of attached to being in the world, and yet we're beginning to question our relationship to the world, which is why I like this third level of honesty the best, because now when we move into this third level, we're kind of saying, okay, how do I honestly feel? In other words, what's the question behind the question that's behind the question? And most people have a difficult time saying, what's the question behind the action? Most won't then go to another level saying, what's the question behind the question? Why am I really doing this? What's my real, genuine intent? You know, am I trying to look good in the eyes of others? Am I trying to justify myself? Am I trying to make myself happy? Am I trying to make other people happy? You know, am I being true to myself? Am I really beating to my own drum? Am I really walking my path for me without concern about how other people perceive me? And that starts to open up a whole new level and layer of potential, again, greater unlimitedness. And in that, you know, we might still be doing all the same things. However, now we're becoming more real with ourselves and more in the present moment, coming from our heart, saying, you know, and making choices, literally, that this is how I choose to create and experience life, rather than be part of a life that I lose myself in, which is how, you know, most of us have operated. So now we're going to deeper and deeper levels, and these can be very core issues. You know, it can be very deep. You know, can be on religious levels, spiritual levels, you know, self-acceptance levels, tremendous self-acceptance levels, and that exploration begins to weed out even more of these conflicting energies. And what happens is, we begin to, in this process of getting very genuine and very honest about ourselves, we become more real to ourselves, and we really do come more from our heart. And the heart, from my experience, is always a far better guide than our mental constructs of how we relate to life. And the heart will often, you know, make an artist could become a business person because their heart really said that. And a business person might find in this third level of honesty that they've always wanted to be an artist. And that's where some people have certainly rebelled in that ultimate sense, where they've become, oftentimes geniuses, the ones that have gone so far beyond and said, this is possible. That's what that third level creates. Because when we're not busy conforming to what has been, we open ourselves up to the potential of what can be. And the heart will always be the greatest guide. And that's where we'll begin to find our true passion, our true sense, our true gifts, and really be able to bring forth what we came here to bring forth in the purest essence. Doesn't make any of the others wrong. Doesn't mean that anybody that's not going to that third level is wrong. It just simply is levels of conscious awareness of self and being more real to ourselves. And the more real we are to ourselves, the more we are real and a more potent part of family, community, society at large.
So, does this mean that becoming totally honest with oneself may mean that actually you discover that you're not such a good person after all, and you're not really on a spiritual path, to be honest? You'd much rather be driving around in a flashy car and living the material good life, as distinct from really penetrating to the heart of things and discovering that at heart you are a very spiritual being, and that there's a heart of gold there, and that's really the true you, which presumably would be kind of more desirable, really, in anybody's eyes, especially your own. But does this, what you're saying, does it really mean facing up to where you are in your own path, perhaps? And
it's a yes and a yes. It's a yes, yeah, in that we often find the more real we get, the more honest we are with ourselves, we start to realize that we aren't necessarily very happy with ourselves. We begin to realize that we have made lots of choices that were not necessarily coming from the more authentic self, the more real self, the more core self. And of course that brings up, an incredible great opportunity to forgive all those, because in that sense, those things that we could have perceived as great choices at the time, with a second level and third level of honesty, might reveal themselves to have been perhaps mistakes or things that we could have done differently. That creates a whole nother can of worms of relationship to experiences, because what's honest, at the time, if that's where we came from, that's what we chose to do, we can detach and let go and forgive and release and allow that experience to have helped us understand a deeper level of honesty now, because we've got contrast. We can say, oh, well, again, we've used this phrase, had I known then what I know now. Well, when we begin to explore ourselves, we begin to reveal all kinds of aspects of ourselves, the good, the bad, and the ugly, things that we didn't necessarily, we may not necessarily like of ourselves at this particular moment as we're going through this process, which is why, unconditional love and letting, accepting all these, amalgamating all these various ways we have acted and reacted to life is part of this honesty process. And it is more of a process. This isn't like an overnight, oh, I'm honest, I'm dishonest. Really, this level of honesty isn't about judging. It's not about criticizing. It's about observing. And what we're talking about isn't about, did I do the moral compass thing? Whatever I think that is, based on whatever my cultural religious structures are, and they do differ, they do vary. This is not one thing that works universally, because there's so many different rituals and traditions and beliefs running out there, suggestions, limitations, ways people view life, and then they imply that limitation on someone else. Can we say that we come to a core authentic self that we think is spiritually good, or that is doing the right thing? We're back to that judgment place again. Who's to say what's right? If we are enjoying our lives with harm to none, it really doesn't matter what level of expression that comes in. If we're coming from an authentic self and we're utilizing resources to an end that benefits a greater whole, which is really how the heart works. It's interconnected and interdependent. It recognizes its relationship to the whole. Then judgment, which is that moral compass side of us, really begins to fade away, because the more we come into our heart center, the more we become aware of ourselves, we become aware of all those around us as being like ourselves, the more we become genuine. And in that case, this type of almost transcendent level of honesty really isn't about the judgment of what's right or wrong, honest, dishonest. We're talking about something that's intrinsic, where we are living in each moment, exploring each moment, following inner promptings within each moment that are more heart-centered than they are from the mind or from the suggestions of others. So in this sense, we're as one goes into this greater and greater, deeper and deeper space, it really isn't about, am I an authentic person? That makes me wonderful. Or am I out flying around in the material world, and does that make me not so wonderful? Or vice versa. It's not about worrying or concerning ourselves. It's about being genuine with our heart and doing what we are prompted from within as a way to approach. And none of us can answer that for another person. It's impossible. We will never know that because of all the things that lead up to that particular person's life stream and that experience. What we're saying is, in this discussion of the quality of honesty, we simply begin to ask what's honest for ourselves. And again, not from this external moral construct, but a deeper inner construct of who am I really? And the more we ask that question, who am I really? How do I really view life? This very practical sense of self comes forth, because now we're actually taking a very kind of nebulous unconditional love, a very nebulous sense of honesty, and we're saying very practically, by experimentation, by evolution, by acknowledging and actually contemplating honesty, each moment provides opportunities, experiments, to say, well, am I coming from my heart or am I not? And we will learn and grow with our own levels of honesty. And what happens is we begin to create as a tremendous gift. The more we become real to ourselves, the more we inspire those around us to begin to ask themselves the question. Because we're all not beating to the same drum, trying to conform, trying to fit in. We're all recognizing that there's tremendous diversity and tremendous opportunity in that diversity. And that's the gift, not the conformity. So it's a very multidimensional, very deeply layered thing, and certainly not one that I would want to say, what is honesty? Because it's a very personal, intimate journey. And as you've kind of alluded to, as you yourself have gone through this journey, you've realized a lot of things about yourself. Yet they're not singular and concrete. They actually evolve. Because once you realize that, I don't necessarily know if I like that part of myself. Now that I realize it, and maybe I want to scurry back to the old way, it's like, no, accept that, amalgamate that, realize that we are and have been an amalgamation of lots of things, and yet there's still a deeper, truer self. And the more we go within, the more that deeper, truer self reveals itself.
So the path then from honesty to unconditional love, or why honesty is an aspect of unconditional love, is the more honesty there is, the more acceptance there is of self, which is a feature of unconditional love for oneself, isn't it? And the more, therefore, the heart opens, presumably, to oneself.
And the beauty with all of these qualities of unconditional love, that which we do for ourselves, we simultaneously do for those around us. Because the more we recognize all these aspects of ourselves, and this is one of the more amazing things, is that when I found more and more about myself, about why I act and react the way I do, the better I have come to understand myself, what pushes my buttons, what causes me to react, what causes me to come from qualities that are always not necessarily always from love, the more I've been able to see myself in other people, the more I've been able to see other people act and react. And by having greater understanding for myself, greater compassion for myself, greater acceptance, it's been far easier to be more compassionate and less reactive with those around me when they're coming from those places, because I understand where they're coming from, because I've taken the time to understand where I come from. And those parts, again, are universal. They play out differently and uniquely by every individual, and yet there's this core theme that is universal, and that there's a core honest level, a core genuine level, a core intimate level, a core unconditional level that has really just got layers of beliefs and rituals and actions and reactions and experiences and time and all these myriad things layered upon it. And yet when we understand how we've gotten here, it's far easier to be compassionate when we gaze upon people who are where we have been, because now we understand, again, through the contrast of our own life, we understand where they are, and we realize it doesn't matter where they are. We're not here to change them.